institutional racism. I know you pointed out that there are individual instances of racism.
Yes.
But I definitely do believe that there is institutional racism. And the reason why I say that is because when you look at what the FBI released in 2006, where they said that white supremacists were invading police departments, or when James Comey essentially said that there is a history of minorities being targeted by the police, and he says, oh, it's just minorities not pretty. And then you also look at Supreme Court rulings where they say that southern governments, state governments in the United States are literally insurgent because they're trying to limit the African American and minority vote. It begs the question, like, how can you say there's no institutional racism when these institutions themselves are confessing that we're doing these things? And yes, they're being checked at times, but these things are happening.
Okay, so there are a couple separate questions there because there's specific data points that you're mentioning there, the 2006 FBI report, and then you're mentioning also the Supreme Court decision on the Voting Rights Act and the rewriting of the Voting Rights Act. So as far as the Voting Rights Act goes, there is not a lot of evidence to suggest that black votes are being undercounted in southern states. It's just the evidence is very scanty there. Justice Scalia's, I think he wrote dissent in that case. Actually, it would have been the majority opinion in that case because they struck down the VRA. Is pretty telling and has a lot of countervailing data on that, so it's worth reading. As far as the idea of institutional racism, so here's my general view about institutional racism. When I say that there are individuals inside, I'm not saying individuals don't exist inside departments. I'm sure that there are some cops who are racist. The question is, how do we fight, how do we fight racism? When we say institutional racism, the problem is there's no way for me to fight that with you because it's too vague. So if you say a particular institution is racist and then demonstrate to me the evidence that the institution is racist, not that it's badly policed, not that it's incompetent, because there are police departments that are incompetent, but that there's actual motivated racism there, then we can do something about it and I'll stand right alongside you. But my problem is that when people say institutional racism, it seems to me a broad rubric under which they can subsume all complaints about American society or the cops. So you'll have situations where a black guy gets shot by the cops, and the first reaction is not, was the cop incompetent? It was the cop had to be racist because it was a white cop and a black guy. Right? And so what you've seen is the DOJ in some cases, like for example, Seattle Police Department, they'll say that there's institutional bias there, but then they'll provide no actual evidence of institutional bias. They'll just say a disproportionate number of black people were imprisoned or arrested by the police department. Well, is it possible that a disproportionate number of black people were criminals in Seattle? Sure. I mean, that's actually what they found in 1994. They thought that there was institutional racism at the Highway Patrol in New Jersey. There's a federal case about it. And what they ended up finding, they did a study that they then tried to quash. And what the study found is that they were actually under-profiling black people, that there were just more black people speeding in New Jersey. So the point that I guess I'm making here is that I like when it's great that you're coming up and citing individual instances of data, and I want to look at each of those instances of data. I don't want to say that there's broad institutional racism in the United States because you have to name to me the exact institution. And you have to name to me how it's spread throughout that institution, and it isn't just individuals within that institution, and then we can change it. Okay, so that's an institution that has racism. That's not the same thing as arguing there's institutional racism in the United States as a general rule, because that suggests that America is generally racist, which is something with which I disagree.
So, yeah, I might agree with you that there are some instances of America where it's not very racist. But then, in those cases where when we do discuss that racism in the institution, it's hard as a black person because you're then told that you cannot discuss this because you're calling out people like, when you start talking about white supremacists in these organizations, not to say that all cops are white supremacists, but they are there, like they are some people like you said.
Right, and if you find the cop is white supremacist, again, I'm willing to stand by you. The problem is when you make blanket statements like there are cops who are white supremacists. I'm willing to say there are, but the percentage matters here. I mean, are we talking about 70% or are we talking about like one guy? Right, so and that I think is the big debate here. And so that's why whenever I have these conversations, I try to narrow it down to what's the most specific thing we can talk about that we can solve together. Because I promise you, I will go out there with you and protest against a racist shooting. Like when Walter Scott was shot in South Carolina, I'm on your side, right? I'm on the side of the person who was shot because that was a terrible shoot. Everybody saw that was a terrible shoot. But when people say that what happened in Ferguson, Missouri with Michael Brown, when they say that it was hands up, don't shoot, that's white racism, there's no evidence of that whatsoever, and that was actually an attempt to get a cop on the basis of really bad evidence. So I think that it's incumbent on us to actually show our work. Instead of just saying institutional racism, let's go on and protest, let's find the specific instance, and then we can solve it. Then we can solve the problem together.
Last question.
Yeah, sure.
So essentially, yeah, because just add on to that, like, so I do agree, but then oftentimes when we start protesting, when we start doing all these things, there is this general fear that there is this conversation where it's already looked at as we're delegitimized because they say, okay, African Americans just going crazy, black people just going crazy, and all these things. And it's hard to have dialogue.
I mean, if that happens, that's wrong. I think that it depends on the nature of the protest. So my problem with the Black Lives Matter movement, as a general matter, to take an example, is that when you say things like Black Lives Matter, the implication is not the one that like other lives don't matter so much as it is the suggestion that there are a bunch of people, a broad swath of people in America who don't care about black lives. That's the implication, and I don't think that's true. I think that we all care about black lives, and I think that if the question were, what should we do about this particular shooting? That's one thing, but if the idea is that cops are shooting black people because black people are black people, I don't see any statistical evidence of a trend of that. So that's the problem with BLM. BLM tries to draw a trend from an anecdote. You want to protest the anecdote, I'll protest the anecdote with you. You want to protest the trend, you first have to identify to me statistically the trend exists. Great, sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but I appreciate it.